Now that we know that we have sorted out all the layout files, we can go into the list frag where we need to set up the recycler view. But in order to do that, there's a few steps we must follow. So we'll get back to the list frag later on. First thing, we're going to create a new custom class. So just go to right-clicking on your package and say new Java class. So we're going to create a class called person. For this class, we will only have two fields here. So we're going to say private string name, and we will have a private string telephone number. And then for the rest, we let the IDE generate this for us. So just right click and say generate, and we're going to generate the constructor, select both, say OK, and then just go to the bottom there and generate again getter and the setter, select the two and say OK. So for this class called person, we've got a name and a telephone number field, and in the constructor we accept the name and the telephone number, and that name and telephone number will be set to these values. Also, there's getters and setters for all of the fields. Now the second step is to go and create the custom layout file, how every item in the list view will be displayed. So you're going to go to your resources layout folder, right click there, and we're going to create a new layout resource file. I'm going to change this to a linear layout again, and let's give it the name row_layout and say OK. Right, so now we can go and open up this. Let's just zoom in a bit and see how we can define this one row. So what I'm going to do here is to drag in a linear layout that is horizontal. And then on this horizontal linear layout, make sure that we have the height there as wrapping the content. And then on this horizontal linear layout, let me just see on the drawable, we have the picture called contact there. And that's the picture I want to have as the first item here. So let's go to common, drag in the image view there into the horizontal linear layout. Click on project, choose your picture and say OK. If the picture is not showing there, you can just go to your build menu and clean the project. Right, so now on this specific picture, let's resize that picture to, let's say, a 50 by 50, and you'll see there's a little error there. So let's just quickly handle that error. So if you go into it, you can see that this part there is what we've done in previous videos also. We need to select that whole part, Command C or Control C to copy, and then we're going to go down to our Gradle scripts and then go into your module app, the build.gradle file. And then somewhere there inside of your default configuration there, we will paste that one line and click on sync now. Right, when that's done syncing, then we can go back to our row layout and you can see there's no errors anymore. So after this, I'm just going to drag in one text view after that image view. So see the dotted lines there. When I drag this image, it must be inside of this linear layout, but after the image view. Okay, so now I'm just going to go into the text part and remove the weight properties there. And then if we go back to design, it looks like this. Right, so for this one, I'm going to click on the layout margin at the top. Let's make the top margin 20. That's a bit too much. Let's make it 10. And then for that text view, I'm going to go down and set the text style to bold and maybe the size to an 18 there. And that should be fine. Now let's add some margin on the left there as well. So let's add a left margin of 10, maybe a bit more, let's say 15. And then for this one also a left margin of, let's say 10. And I think at the top, let's have a top margin of 2 and a bottom margin of 2. Right, and then this text view, we can maybe move it a bit from the top. So let's make it 12 there. Right, so that should be fine. For this text view, let's give the text view an ID there, and we're going to call it TV name to display the guy's name there. And now after designing this, I can now go and create this card layout. So I'm going to add the card view there. So card view, the width must match the parent and the height will wrap the content. Right, so now let's just add the namespace declaration for the card view. So I'm going to copy that line and paste it there. Instead of saying app there, we're going to use a card_view. Right, so now we can start with the card view declarations here. So I'm going to go to card view and we're going to set the background color to the card view light background. I'm going to set the corner radius to a 5 dp. Let's say the elevation will be a 5 dp as well. And then I'm not going to use the compat padding, so I'm going to set that to false. Just see if there's anything else there. I think for the rest we are fine. So let's just add a margin there, a layout margin, an all margin there of, let's say, 5 dp. Right, so that's basically the card view. So I'm going to take everything that's outside of that card view now, but still inside of the linear layout. I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to paste it inside of the card view. Let's go and have a look at the design view, and you can see that the design view now looks like this, which is a great card view. Now on the card view itself, or on the vertical linear layout, let's just make sure that we're going to set the height to wrap the content. Now don't worry too much about this rendering problem of the card view. You can see it says, just see where is that error now. It says rendering problem there, failed to find the style in the current theme. That's not a problem, don't worry about that, it's displaying 100% correct. Okay, so this is then our custom layout file. So we've got our custom class, that's called person. We've got our custom layout file. So now the last thing before we go to the list frag is to create this adapter class. So you're going to right click and say new Java class again. And let's call this one the person adapter. And we say OK. Now for this adapter class, we need to extend something there at the top. So we're going to say extends Recyclerview .adapter. Now for now we're not going to set the type there, so we'll just have an alt enter there and implement the methods, and you select all of those methods. Now right at the top I'm going to create an array list that will hold the person objects that we're going to pass into this adapter, and let's call it people. Then we create the constructor, so it's going to be public person adapter, constructor same name as the class, and then we're going to accept the context as well as an array list of person objects that we will pass in. And let's call this one list. Right. And then the only thing I want to do for now is to just set this people to the list that was passed in. So we will set that one to list. So later on we'll work with the context. Right, so this is then the constructor, and we've set up the array list. So when the array lists get passed in, we will set it to our array list at the top. Now instead of using the Recyclerview view holder, we will create our own view holder now. So I'm going to use public class, so it's an inner class, public class, and I'm going to call it view holder. But now this view holder will be part of the person adapter class, not of the Recyclerview. But we will see that we will extend this Recyclerview.viewHolder. So we're basically overriding this one that we're returning there and creating our own one. Right, so open up that class, and then on this error, Alt-Enter, create the constructor matching super, and then we've got that constructor. Now in the view holder, we basically need to declare all of the items that we want to get a hold of to change in this custom layout of ours. And the only thing we want to change is this text view called TV name. So let's set that up. It's going to be a text view, TV name. Then inside of this view holder, if you remember from the previous videos, this item view will actually later on be a link to this row layout. So now we're going to get the TV name variable by looking at this item view. So it's going to be item view, which is basically referring now to row layout. On this row layout, go and find the view by its ID. Find view by ID, and it's called r.id.tvname. And because we want to have that item clickable, we're going to also set the on-click listener and say new on-click listener. So we'll come back to how this on-click listener will work. So now, after you've created your view holder, we can then go and say, well, the type we want to have at the top will be this view holder that is part of the person adapter class. So it's going to be person adapter dot view holder. And now you'll see that there's some problems there. So if you go down, instead of now using the Recyclerview's view holder, we're going to use this class, the person adapter's view holder. And instead here of using this view holder that was passed in as the Recyclerview's view holder, it will be our own custom one. So the one that we just created. Right, so that takes care of all of these errors. So now let's go into this method, the onCreateView method, or createViewHolder method, and we're going to create now a link to this view, this external view called row layout. So now in order to do this, we need to use the layout inflator. So we're going to say layout inflator dot from, and then in the brackets we're going to look at this view group and just get the context of the view group, and then make sure your cursor is at the end of that bracket, and then we're going to inflate this resource file, which is now called row layout. So it's going to be r.layout.rowlayout. Passing in again the view group, and for the last variable there, or the last parameter there, we pass in the false value. Right, so that's now a link to that external layout called row layout. So now you can see that we return the view holder object here, which means I need to pass in this view to this view holder constructor. That link row layout now becomes item view, and that's why we can say item view.find the view by its ID TV name. So what we return here is just to be a new view holder. And now make sure that your view holder is, in any case, now the person adapter that we're referring to. And then we just pass in the view there. So now this onCreateViewHolder will run. I think first runs the constructor. We reset the list. And then it will run this onCreateViewHolder where it gets a link to the row layout. This row layout called view now is basically passed into the view holder constructor. That constructor has now got a hold of that item view, and we make a connection to TV name so that we can set it. Now in the onBind view holder, we will just get hold of that view holder, which is basically the one that was returned there, the one that we've got now connected to the view, and we're going to say viewHolder.itemView, and now the item view is basically this whole link or this whole layout. So on the item view, we will set the tag to the object where we are currently at. So it's going to be get I. So remember that this onBind view holder runs now for every element that we have in our people array list. So we're going to pass in a list of person objects, and for every one of those person objects inside of the list, this onBind view holder will run, starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, and the count will be indicated by this index value. So we're basically saying where we are currently at on that item view, we set the tag to this specific object so that later on when it gets clicked there, we know exactly which one was clicked. Right, so now for the next one, we're just going to say viewHolder dot, and you can see we can now get a reference to this TV name there. So I'm going to say TV name dot set text, and the text I want to set is inside of that object. So I'm going to call people.getI. That gets me the object that we're currently at. And I'm going to call getName in order to show the name of that person. And now remember, it's going to run for every element that you have. Now the last thing is the getItemCount. And for that item count, we're just going to return people.size, which is the amount of objects that we have in the array list called people. Right, so now we're done with all of these custom classes and layouts that we created. Now we can actually go to our list frag and set up this recycler view. So now on the list frag, I'm going to have a few declarations at the top. Remember that in the previous fragment examples that we did, we said it should extend a list fragment. So in this case, we're not going to use a list, we're going to use the recycler view. So you keep it as it is. So we're going to have a few declarations here. We're going to say recycler view. Let's call it recycler view as well. And then we're also going to have a recycler view dot adapter. And this we'll just call my adapter. That will ultimately be linked to person adapter because person adapter extends from this recycler view dot adapter. Right, and then we're going to have recycler view dot layout manager, and let's just call it layout manager as well. And then we'll also have a custom view declaration here, which I'll get to now. Now, for the first thing, you can see that the constructor runs. It's just an empty constructor, and then there's an onCreateView method. And this is where we basically set the view for this fragment, which you can see as fragment_list. So it's the one that's got your recycler view there. If you go back to it, you can see that we set that one as an ID of list. So if I go back, you will see that this onCreateView then creates the view for this list fragment as fragment_list. But now because I want to have a connection to this view, otherwise I cannot get to that list or that recycler view that we call list, we need to use this view variable now that we declared at the top. So I'm going to set it to view equals, and I want this whole line there that inflates that view for me. I'm going to cut it there and just paste it. So I want to get hold of that view first, and then we can return it. So it's basically still doing the same thing. I just want to get a hold of that list or that fragment list so that I can refer back to the recycler view. Okay, so this part will get clear now. Now we need another method here, and the method we need is the onActivityCreated. So you're going to right click, say generate, override methods, and search for the onActivityCreated method. Double click it and your method will be there. Now we can start setting up this recycler view. So remember, the onActivityCreated method runs as soon as your activity is done with all its work. Right, so now we're going to set up the recycler view. So I'm going to say recycler view equals. Now instead of in an activity where we just say find the view by its ID, we need to get to this layout fragment list and find the view by its ID. So that's why I needed this view. So I'm going to refer to that view and then call find the view by its ID, r.id. We call it list. Then on the recycler view, we're going to set the has fixed size to true. Let's set up the layout manager quickly. So the layout manager will be new linear layout manager. And then we can pass in the activity, we can just pass into this keyword or the activity.this. But in this case, we need to refer to the activity that's hosting this fragment. And so we're just going to call get activity. And that's referring to the activity that's hosting this fragment. And then we can set to the recycler view, we can set the layout manager as this layout manager. Right, so now the next step will be to go and create an array list with person objects to send to the adapter. So we declared the adapter there, but before we can do the declaration or the initialization of this adapter and pass in the list, the array list, we need to have an array list first. So for this, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm going to go into my project folder there, or not my project, the package folder, right click and say new Java class. And the class I want to create here, I'm just going to call it application class. Say OK. So what I want to do now is to create a class that Android calls the application class. You're going to say extends application there. And this now becomes the application class of your application. So what is the application class? The application class basically is a class that will run right at the beginning, even before your main activity starts. Your application class will run. And then when everything ends, right at the end, your application class is also the very last thing that gets destroyed with your application. So this is a nice way to persist data throughout your application. So let's see how to set this up quickly. So we need one method there. So just go to generate and say override methods, and you just need the onCreate method there. So this application class, to just say extends application doesn't make it the application class for your specific application. You need to go into your manifest file next. Somewhere inside of your opening application tag, you see there it closes for the opening tag. So somewhere in there, anywhere there, we're just going to add a name property, and you see it automatically picks up your application class there. So that's the one we declared where we said extends application. So now this became our application class. So when this application starts running, the very first thing that will run is this class. So in this class then, I'm going to set up a variable here. I'm going to have it public and static. So it belongs to this class called application class. And let's call it array, or define it as an array list that will store person objects. And let's call this one people as well. Then inside of the onCreate, I can go and set it up. So I will say people equals new array list. Remember, the type is not really necessary, but you can add the type there. And now we can add a few people here. So I'm going to say .add new person, And if you remember from your person class, the constructor accepts a name and a telephone number. So let's just add a name there. I'm just going to have Chuck Norris there again. And then the telephone number there will be whatever you want to add that. And then we're going to say people again, dot add again. And we'll have a new person object again. And let's make this one John Rambo. And let's just add another one. People.add new person. And let's have Nelson Mandela. Okay, I'm not even sure if that telephone number's at the correct length, but that doesn't matter. Okay, so now we have created a few people objects inside of this, or a few person objects inside of the people array list. And now we can start using it anywhere in our application. So I'm going to go to the list frag and let's set up that adapter quickly. So it's going to be my adapter equals new person adapter. The context will be this.getActivity. And then the second argument, you'll remember in our class, let me just close a few of these. Application class can be closed also. If you remember in our person adapter, it accepts a context and an array list. So now the array list will be in my application class. If you put the dot there, you'll see people there. And I'm passing in that as the list for my adapter. Then on the recycler view, I'm going to call set adapter. And we set the adapter to my adapter.